Welcome, everybody, to the show. Welcome, Dan, and welcome our special guest, Mr. Ben Hall. Welcome, Ben. Thanks for coming.
This is something. This is something. I want answers, man. I want answers.
All right, well, I will let you introduce the topic, Dan, but first I'm going to ask Ben, because somebody in the chat is going to ask, so let's get it out of the way. When can we expect the Musket and Pike dual pack in our greedy little hands?
So that's an excellent question. It is out of my tight fists.
Understood.
Off to the
best
printers.
guess is good.
So off to the printers. Given the current supply chain problems, we're hoping by the end of summer, maybe. So we've got two things off to the printer. We have the bulge expansion off to the printer for Fields of Fire and the dual pack. The dual pack's pretty straightforward in that it doesn't involve cards, so maybe it'll be a little faster. So I think 4 to 6 months, and we sent it off a month ago, or a little over a month ago. So we hit send on the last review a few weeks back, and it was a ton of stuff. It is packed full of chocolatey goodness.
Yet another value-packed addition to the wargaming hobby from GMT Games.
Yes. Yes. Well, yeah. This Accursed Civil War is 20 years old, so it got, in addition to new counters and stuff, we updated maps, all the printed material, everything. So it got a nice little facelift.
Mounted boards.
No, there's a lot. There's 11 battles in there, so it is map sheets. So
is it
as God and Charles S. Roberts intended?
Is it Ben Hall difficult?
Well, it's the same Musket and Pike series, so it's been tried and true for 20 years now. So it's the tires have been kicked pretty hard, so it can be a little fiddly with little bits, but it's. It is lower density than some games. So most sides have about 30 to 40 pieces, and a battle normally takes about 2 to 4 hours, depending on how much you think between moves.
That's incredibly reasonable. You know that?
Yeah, that's so when
I think so.
Well, I'd like to say. I mean, the series has done very well for us in GMT, and we 6 volumes in print. And then this one does well. We'll fire up the next 2, which are out of print, in another dual pack.
So you know what? I want to get some answers on this question, and you know what? Then Ben, I'm sure they're gonna ask you questions about your games, and we're gonna go there 100%. So first of all, to me, the question is, what if Patton would have. If the administration would have listened to Patton and they would have done, it's funny, eh? That was, I guess you could have said the unspeakable, but it's very speakable now, if you know what I'm saying. So what I'm trying to say is that they were allies in World War II. How can he have this minding, like once the Russians came in, took over Berlin, why would he say, okay, now let's go for the Russians?
Well, there was a lot of folks that didn't like the Russians very much. So we were allies, but we weren't like, kissing cousins, right? There was a lot of, and some of it justified, some of it not. There was a lot of Red Scare, the communist, the whole communism versus everybody else thing. There was a lot of international fear because there was an international communist movement. And so there were valid reasons to be very concerned that, the Russians would be a long-term threat. And so, so Patton wasn't really alone in kind of giving the gimlet eye towards
Churchill. Churchill was.
Churchill. Yeah, I mean the Brits and many folks in America were very concerned, but the administration. The best thing the Russians had going for them, or the Soviets, I should say, was they had a massive network of true believers in the West. in the fall of the Soviet Union and the opening up of the archives really is eye-opening how extensive their network of influence and espionage was permeated. And the funny thing is they got it for free because so many of these people bought into the utopianism of the communist mantra. And so they had a lot of true believers, and those are very difficult agents, right? The people who, they weren't in it for the cash. There were some of those, but there were some true believers all over. And so that gave them a really powerful hedge throughout all sorts of different influences.
So what if they would have done it? What, the West would have been the bad guys? Is that what would have been?
Well, so you got to kind of look at this zeitgeist. There's this kind of post-imperial and post-colonial movement sweeping the world right after World War II, and so then the communists were very good at positioning themselves politically with this burgeoning nationalism that exploded across the world. So then that's why we found out, the French and the British and the Americans were like, oh, wait, let's hold on to the old order and do this peacefully. And they're like, why? You screwed us over for 200 years. Why should we play nice? And so, thank goodness for India and the British that they kind of generally peacefully kind of, hey, let's go our own way. You go your way, we'll go our way. But you had this falling apart of the international order right after the war. The communists did a great job about positioning themselves to align with these national independence movements. And so we found ourselves in a very difficult situation because we're like, hey, we're in for freedom. And you're like, and so all these other colonial, what were once colonial holdings were like, yeah, but you look like the guy who just been screwing us over for 200 years. And this guy said he's going to help us over and have our own country. And yay, it sounds good to me. And so we really didn't do ourselves any favors. And it doesn't mean we couldn't have. It would have taken a little bit more wisdom from our foreign agencies and Department of State and various folks to look at things in a broader view. But we were victims of kind of coming up through the old order, and so a lot of our people throughout the Department of State and the government were still kind of old school folks, and they saw the world in that old order and really didn't align with the times. And you have to give the communists kudos for kind of jumping on the bandwagon.
Well, I was going to say, who's the brains behind this ideology, man?
Well, so the Soviets had quite a little brain trust, and the beauty of communism exploded among a lot of intellectuals. So it's a lot of smart people all over the world who kind of got united on a kind of a common theme. And so they kind of crowdsourced how to take over the world, right? and so you had folks like Ho Chi Minh and other folks kind of jumping on the bandwagon saying, hey, and then they could pay to influence, and they were very adept at it. And so you have to give credit where credit is due. And then the West was more interested in rebuilding Europe. So we play, so if you're looking at like a card game of where did we play our cards? We played them in Japan. We played them in Germany, rebuild, and then, France and England got stuck trying to hold on to their colonial possessions, and it just drug them down. I mean, so we were the only one who came out of the war positioned well because the war wasn't fought in America. So we came out of it smelling, of all the major combatants, we had the least damage to our infrastructure. We came out with more than we started. Yeah. Our economy grew. Our industry grew. So we came out smelling like a rose. So, economically speaking, we were in the catbird seat, but our who we are as a people isn't a dominant, despite what the Soviets would tell you. We're not really interested in dominating the world. We're just interested in doing business with everybody in the world. So if people get that, then it's like, oh, those darn NATO wants to take over. No, not really. We just want to do business with everybody. We just really want to sell you stuff. We want you. We would like for you to buy the stuff we want to make, and we want to buy the stuff you make, and let's make a deal, because at some basic level, we're all Yankee traders. But yeah, I mean, you're true. Mr. Ahrens is exactly right. They didn't turn out to be very imperialistic, because nobody is completely altruistic in their motives. When it comes to international relations, eventually somebody wants to be on the upside of that deal.
So I mean, we had the bomb. We didn't have we did not have the bomb.
Well, we had some bombs.
Well, yeah, and we had 10 years before they had a bomb. Well, 7 years. So we could have made more bombs, and we did make more bombs. So if we had turned on them, we would have cleaned their clock, militarily. But then what?
I was going to say, then what?
Then what? You're stuck with, it cost a fortune just to rebuild Germany. Then we're on the hook to rebuild all of Eastern Europe and part of what was the Soviet Union. Could we have built a better place? Well, I don't know. We could have been stuck in an endless loop where we could have been stuck with a big giant insurgency. But clearly, you could look at the balance of forces and the trajectory of forces. If we decided to duke it out with them, we would clean their clock. Because they were at the end of their ability to beat the Germans. They were running out of people, and our ability to just crush them with steel was something that they would never even consider. I mean, and by our own accounts and the stuff we've got from Stalin, he was deathly afraid of the bomb. So would we had to have destroyed them completely to get some sort of surrender? Probably not, but then what? What do you got?
What does that actually look like, though?
What do you do?
Does it look? What's the impetus? What's your? I mean, so one of the questions.
Yeah, I mean, the American
right,
people,
exactly. One of the questions that comes up is what? Okay, so we've decided for the purposes of our hypothetical scenario that it's 1945, and the Western Allies are going to start fighting the Soviets. What are the objectives here on both sides? Right, not just is it to run to Moscow and do regime change in Moscow? And I mean that right. I mean, Russia's real big, as we keep getting reminded of every day right now.
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's an excellent question. So two main reasons why, yes, we had a lot of distrust, but one is there's no casus belli. You're going to have to sell the American people on something, right? The Japanese, because heck, we didn't even want to get involved in World War II until the Japanese. I mean, Roosevelt was like dragging us, kicking and screaming, because we're like, another war in Europe. George Washington told us, don't get involved in wars in Europe. They have a long and bloody history. Stay out of it. And so Americans were like, and then Roosevelt's pulling us in because he had enough vision to say, well, if we don't help out, Western democracy as we know it is done for. And so, to his credit, that was very visionary. Even before 40, we could have been able to, but that's, what were we going to do with it? We were trying to rebuild what was left over. Again, yes, you could have cleaned their clock, but then what? The real challenge is, what happened in China?
That's true. Actually, the question, the Western Allies versus
China,
versus Soviets question kind of focuses, it kind of tunnel visions onto that situation in Europe. Yeah. Meanwhile, there is, a whole rest of the world going on, including a big bloody war that's just about ready in 1945 to reignite in China. And so, that maybe seems to some people to be the battleground on which the battle versus communism is going to get fought, not necessarily on the plains of Eastern Europe.
And that is an excellent point. I think the two books that I would recommend if you hadn't read them. So one is Enter the Dragon, which is a British author who looked at interviewing a bunch of Chinese who fought in the Korean War to get the Chinese perspective of the Korean War, which is very eye-opening because a lot of American historians read a lot about the Korean War, but it seems it's very American perspective. So it's very myopic. It's interesting, got a lot of good lessons, but it's really illustrative to see from the Chinese point of view what they saw the war as. And then the other one is Tower of Skulls, which is kind of flipping, the looking at World War II from, the Chinese perspective, and what a cataclysmic event the war was in China. And then when we talk about what shapes the world of today, the great power competition now is, China. In China, we have two kind of diametrically opposed problems. We have this Russia problem, which is their population is shrinking, their economy is very weak, even before the sanctions, and they're on a downward trajectory from when they had this they were a Soviet empire, and then you flip over and you got China on this kind of upward swing. It's kind of a bumpy road. There's a lot of it's hot air. And, but, see, they were to disarm the jet, but got attacked by communists. Well, a big part of the Chinese were communists. They took a big time out in their own civil war to fight the Japanese. And then they said, all right, war's over. Game on. And then we dumped a bunch of money into Chiang Kai-shek, and he and his family and his general stole a bunch of money and didn't really. And then they folded like a house of cards, and that was really unexpected. Excuse me. The communists thought it was going to be a hard fight, and they were digging in to it's going to take 4 to 5 years. We're going to slug it out with the nationalists because they got so much U.S. support, and then they just went boom, and folded, and the communists were like, we won. What do we do? Oh God, yeah, and then they had real problems. They're like, oh, God, I got this massive population I can't feed. We have real problems. So what do you do when it's like the Taliban taking over Afghanistan now. They're like, hey, we win. Oh God, now what do we do? I know how to set a roadside bomb. Do you know how to run a government? Well, no, actually, do you? No, I don't. I can blow somebody up, but we never really thought we would win. Or if we did, we didn't really think it through. And so the communists really were like, okay, now we actually have to try to rule the government. And then of course, we have a very painful history following Mao Zedong as he becomes increasingly isolated and murderous. He went from, hey, communist leader, hey, let's all come up with a plan to, this, basically, Chinese Hitler type thing where, it was mass murder. Yeah. Mass murder will even out the equation, which unfortunately tends to be where communism ends up. It's like this formula for utopia works great, but we have this hanging chad, which is millions of extra people that we're just going to have to even off the edge by mass murder. And you're like, well, yeah, I have a real problem with that.
Ben, going back to the Patton thing, was there an actual plan for something like this?
There's always plans.
Yeah, I know. Okay.
So there was a plan for war with the British.
Yes,
I mean, military planners make plans for every eventuality they can think of.
Yes. So there's always a plan because one is we didn't trust Stalin that much. And so there was a lot of, shockingly, so there was a lot of, it's very tentative. Now, everybody wanted the war to be over. By 45, the war was pretty, obviously apocalyptic. People wanted the war to be over. America wanted the war in Europe to be over because we weren't done yet in Japan.
Right.
And, so... And the American populace were like, yeah, we get Germany first because of our friends in England and all, but we really want the Japanese to pay, and we want to pay back. They started in Pearl Harbor. There's a huge desire in America to stick it to the Japanese and close the deal and bring our boys home. But the trick is, if a casus belli, if the Russians had overstepped or, gotten aggressive, I think it's pretty obvious that we would have cleaned their clock. They had no concept of strategic air power like we did.
What do you mean gotten aggressive? What we're talking about 45?
Yeah, if the Russians had become more aggressive with the Western allies as a casus belli to go against the Russians, we would have beat the snot out of them.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't have been the desire. I think ultimately, the Western powers were more interested in bringing it to a rapid conclusion so they could get back to business. Let's see. In my opinion, Western allies lost. They go east following the Red Army's parade of JS tanks.
Well, don't forget the Western allies had already made the decision at that point to concede Berlin to the Red Army.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think now to the comment, how far east do you want to go? Well, we don't have to go all the way. We just nuke it, right? At some point. But if we had been dumb enough to just follow in the path all the way to Moscow on the ground, that's ginormous. That probably. But if we go as far as like Poland and we call Eastern Europe, and not go farther just because of the tyranny of distance, we would have just squashed them because they had no concept of air power like we had air power. And I think, yes, he was just a corps commander. He's Army commander.
Army commander at that point, but
yeah,
but he's not like. Yeah, it's not like he's getting Truman on the phone, right?
No, and I think really the premise is he put voice to what other people might have been thinking, and so he wasn't this lone guy going, I don't trust. I mean, Churchill didn't trust the Russians. A lot of people didn't trust the Russians, but is that enough to keep the war going? Probably not.
And I mean, by the sort of May 45, even the U.S. who is of the major belligerents that are fighting at that point, the U.S. is in the best shape, but even the U.S. has begun to demobilize well before May of 45. In Europe, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, we saw the writing on the wall, and it's all about the money, right? So we got away with the minimum level of mobilization compared to our allies and our enemies, which was good for business, right? We had more people working in industry. We didn't have to, yeah, it was a big mobilization. Yeah, we put a lot of millions of people, but in proportion to the size of the population, we came out smelling like a rose, and we wanted to get out of that as quick as possible because, again, it's good for business. You put people back to work, go buy things, build a house, get a job, make something, sell something. It's good for business. We're all Yankee traders at heart in the USA. It's all about the opportunity to make a buck. So the chaos of a destroyed Europe was also opportunity to sell things, build things, teach things, export, build, so we got rich off of rebuilding the destroyed world. And we didn't destroy it on purpose to get rich. It's not to ascribe an ulterior motive, but the reality is we prospered while the other folks were rebuilding from devastation. And even England, they were rationing till the 50s.
Mm-hmm. While being stripped of their empire over the span of several years.
Yeah. And, and we came out with like, hey, we're good. Let's get back to work. None of our cities was leveled. Our factories were all, the real trick is, we mobilize industry for military. Can we redirect it towards consumer goods or something useful, which we were fairly successful doing? Build cars, build trucks, build steel girders to rebuild bridges and roads and all over Europe.
And why did the States not just go into Berlin before the Russians did?
Well, the Russians were closer. The Russians had a more direct path.
Is it really that?
The Red Army had they were pushing really hard.
Yeah,
And,
everybody was. We pumped the brakes a little bit, but we knew that this is a classic. The Germans were going to fight to the death. If you read Cornelius Ryan's The Last Battle, how many people died for that last battle, and it's so sad. It is so sad, and such a waste of human life at that point to just to just have this apocalyptic struggle of, oh wait, let's kill another 100,000 people in the last couple of days. Just
Jesus. And
it's just the amount of loss of life is just staggering to capture the city of Berlin, because the Russians are like, we want to finish this deal now. We're all in, finish it. And we're like, "Ooh, that looks ugly. How about you guys?"
And I'm not sure what the the reasonable chances of a rearmed Germany, right, in the span of 1945 and 46. I mean, what are we going to do? Buy new bicycles for all the old men and boys that they had doing most of the fighting? I mean, they were well beyond the end of their manpower reserves to an extent far greater than the British, who were at the end, or the Soviets, who were very close to the end.
Yeah, so interesting use of manpower too. How the manpower is allocated. So a nice little battle math comparison is in World War I, the British mobilized roughly a similar number of people as they mobilized in World War II. In World War I, they fielded 75 divisions. In World War II, at the end, they had 24 divisions. So like roughly a little under a third, and everything they lost, they had to disassemble a division to make good their losses. So what's the difference? If I mobilize 6.5 million people and I got 75 divisions in World War I and I only get 24 to 21 divisions, where they go? Well, they went in the RAF and they went in the Navy and they went in support. James Holland is good at pointing out that they made this a very conscious decision to invest in steel, firepower over flesh. We will destroy the enemy with bombs, airplanes, and ships and tanks over infantry. We're going to put the minimum number of people in the infantry as necessary, and we're going to use massive amounts of artillery and air power and sea power to crush them. And we got right on. Is the 70 movie wrapped? So to that question, best I can tell, yes. He was a bit of a weirdo.
Very much so.
Yeah. And it's pretty well documented, because we do have his diaries and letters and stuff. That Patton was a bit of an odd duck is an understatement. He did love war. But
that's who you want. That's who you want on your side.
Yeah. I mean, you got to have some crazy people. He showed great bravery on the battlefields of World War I. And then well documented in World War II what he did, but we had other really good generals too. He wasn't the one, but he played very well in the press,
right? Yeah, and wasn't shy about talking to them either.
But yeah, and so it's a great figure for discussion because he's very outspoken. And he produced results, right? So everybody loves a winner. Not that other generals didn't, but he also came at a really good time. So he came in Tunisia on the heels of you hate to overplay how bad it was. The army was untested, right? And they go up against the Germans and they get beaten at Kasserine. And maybe like, it's like, well, this was a pretty untried army. So against a fairly experienced one. So is it really that bad? Then, Patton comes in and the army quits fire and it gets better and better. And then he goes to Sicily. And then the army really kind of comes into its own in Sicily, and then gets a lot of press for their kind of end run around Western Sicily. Now it was not heavily opposed. And so they made a lot of ground, but it kind of showed Americans contributing to the war. And so that put him out front of something big, and because it was hard to show the fighting in the Pacific is like, oh, we took another jungle island, and people are like, well, how does that look on TV? Like another jungle island. It's pretty crappy and awful, and the war there was not good for film and TV. It was a very brutal type of warfare. Not that Sicily was a walk in the park, but it resonated better because there's a lot of people who know where Sicily is on a map. A lot of people couldn't find New Guinea on a map if you paid them.
So is that why the Pacific War is not as popular as the
well, I mean, well, plus we had three times as many people fighting in the Europe theater on the ground. In the Navy, it was kind of flip the piece. I think some of the finest feats of arms for the America were in the Pacific, both on the ground and in the air. And some of it gets very little coverage. Last year I read a really good book on Leyte, and there's not a lot of talk about. It's this huge battle in the ground battle, the invasion and capture of the island Leyte, multiple divisions landing against multiple Japanese divisions, including some of the best divisions in the Japanese army.
How many people are we talking about?
I mean, it's like 16,000 people a division. We had 7 divisions there.
Christ,
it was a ginormous land battle for Leyte. My wife, her great uncle was killed there. And so, that was of interest to me because we still have, we have the grave marker there at the family plot, and, he was the only member of that family. So, he had a draft deferment, but he went instead. He said, I couldn't live with myself if I'd stayed home. And he went, and he was mortally wounded at Leyte in October of 44. And, we have all his letters and stuff. So it's just interesting. A lot of that was how MacArthur controlled the press. It was all about MacArthur, not about his commanders. But the Army, some of the finest hours of the Army, some very in things that people didn't think of. It was like, oh, well, they were doing amphibious attack and amphibious envelopments in contested air environment. So people, it's usually axiomatic. People say, oh, you must have air superiority to do amphibious attack. I'm like, you must have local air superiority. But we didn't have it the whole time because it was a heavily contested air environment over Leyte. There was a lot of back and forth. So it was a very interesting campaign that gets like zero press. The how our Navy recovered from Pearl Harbor and Savo to beating the snot out of the Japanese Navy. It was just great seamanship, great command. How to use air, radar technology to win the war at sea. And one of the things that I think is interesting is there's a parallel to what's going on now, because I think going into this era, it's kind of like the pre-war era, there is new technology that's changing naval warfare that's very unproven. So in that interwar period, we knew carriers and we knew the air power were going to be important in naval warfare. And now we're in a new age where we're like, well, we know missiles and guided missiles and drones and all this technology is going to change how naval warfare works, but it's really unproven. We've not done major naval engagements from peer competitors with the full range of technology. We get little data points here and there. We have the Moskva incident. We have some other little things. We've had some time. We had one of our ships got shot at a couple of years ago with an anti-ship missile, but
it didn't run into a reef made out of missiles. So
no,
it came through okay.
No, well, yeah. I mean, yes, Jeff is exactly right. The ground war in the Philippines in 44 is very underrepresented, both in history and in wargaming.
Even the Philippines game that I got sitting on the shelf behind me doesn't cover it. It's only 41.
Oh, yeah.
So
unwillingness of veterans to pass on their memories of combat and the way they fought.
Why is that? Why is that?
Yeah,
great question.
Remember
Great question.
Well, I would. That is a great question.
Do you agree?
I don't know, because there's a good many good memoirs. There doesn't seem to be a shortage of material. But
well, what's the book on Leyte you were talking about?
It is it's called Leyte 1944, and it is the only. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. It's the only. So the guy wrote, it's the only non-official U.S. Army history book on the ground war there that he could find.
And this is the Nathan Prefer book.
No, I believe so. I'd have to check my.
Well, it's $2.99 in Kindle format right now in the U.S.
Yeah, I thought it was a great book, and it was a slugfest. So yeah, my great uncle was with 7th Infantry Division there. But yeah, I guess the is it unwillingness to people to talk about it? I think the nature of the combat was different. That may have been part of it. I don't know. I think as far as MacArthur goes, the vision of how that was communicated to American people was managed very carefully by MacArthur. And so everything that his army did was all about MacArthur. And he did not share the spotlight. So
I mean, look, obviously he was brilliant, MacArthur, but he was a bit of a prima donna, for God's sake.
Yeah, I mean,
so to what end that he wants to be a prima donna? What is he, Caesar?
Well, that's what the guy that wrote American Caesar thought.
Yeah. Well, yeah, William Manchester said. So depending who you read, some people think he's great, some people don't. When I'm at work, I walk down the MacArthur hallway. So the guy did practice. He was unabashedly brave in World War One, but he became a general officer in World War One, and he served. I mean, he served like over 30 years as a general officer. That's not good for your psyche. So he was such an important figure. Love or hate him, he was an important figure in both the conduct of the war and the post-war era. I mean, so modern Japan owes its success to MacArthur.
Well, yeah.
I mean, love him or hate him, he was very successful in rebuilding a vibrant Japan that became an important part of the broader world economy, the community of nations. It was his vision and drive that rebuilt it, because he was basically king of Japan for years.
There's a movie called Emperor,
yes,
starring Tommy Lee Jones as MacArthur, which is pretty good casting, by the way.
Yeah.
And the emperor of the title is not Hirohito, it's MacArthur.
Yeah. Yes. There's also another movie in the same vein as Downfall, probably made by and it's called Le Soleil. And it's about the Japanese emperor, like near the end of World War II, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating.
That is actually a fairly interesting story. That was super messy, that situation.
Yeah, and he got away with murder. You
mean the emperor?
He got away with murder. Yes, he knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah, but
the idea that Hirohito was, my hands are clean. I was just, pish posh. Yeah. I don't believe that for 5 seconds.
No, impossible. Yeah. But why did he turn against his advisors after, and do that recording and say it's over?
His neck.
Well, I mean, imagine what the situation looks like. Whereas it looks like at the time that each Japanese city, starting with Hiroshima, next Nagasaki, each Japanese city is going to be annihilated one by one.
Well,
You know,
yeah, you know,
it's a I think a pretty reasonable position to see that as an unwinnable situation,
yeah.
even
So,
if you're would rather die for the cause.
well, and yeah, if you hadn't read it, another good one, Gladwell's Bomber Mafia looks at the end of Japan pretty critically, because not only did the atomic bombs take out 2 cities, but Curtis LeMay's firebombing took out like 40 cities.
Like, yeah, and Curtis LeMay, was he nuts?
No, he was brilliant.
Yeah.
But ruthlessly
But
brilliant.
bloodthirsty.
Well, and war
I mean,
is hell.
Well, so again, recommend the book. It's not a long one. It was originally done as an audio book, so it reads well.
Was it Bomber
Bomber Mafia by Malcolm Gladwell. So the guy, the Blink guy, the guy Blink and Outliers and all that. So he's a social scientist, but so it's his first war history. So it's kind of interesting to hear something from somebody else. There's a lot of good factoids, but it does cover Curtis LeMay in detail and how they kind of came up with the idea to firebomb the Japanese city. Well, yeah, I think MacArthur would brilliantly utilized the emperor to achieve his ends. I think MacArthur made him indispensable. He was, I'd say at the time, arguably, could he have done it without him? Probably, because the Japanese were done for. And so Gladwell did point out that the bombing was so catastrophic that we saved millions of. If they hadn't ended the war in April, there was going to be a massive famine and massive starvation, and we did a huge lift of food in as soon as the war was over in August, September, October, and averted mass starvation as quick as we could, because their infrastructure was completely destroyed and millions would have starved to death in Japan.
Man, I don't understand why the states were so benevolent because Japan struck first, man, and this was payback. So why the benevolency, man?
Oh, there were certainly people who tried to make that case.
Well, there were, but walking into it, I think we had, by that time, even the most bloodthirsty, you can only kill them so many. The end of the you don't win the war by killing every single one of them. It just doesn't work. It's we're not into genocide. And I think once people had run the course, you're like, there's women and children, for Pete's sake. I mean, you look at these photos and it's heartbreaking.
It's horrible.
And then these are the innocent victims of their cruel government who drugged them into an unwinnable war and brought an apocalypse on their society. And, it's the only decent thing to do, to then go, oh, okay, let's, we rebuilt, instead of saying, all right, we win, good luck to you. We rebuilt your country. We stayed there. We stuck it out, and we helped them rebuild from scratch. And in Japan today, a wonderful country that has so much to offer to its own people and to the world.
Absolutely. There must have been a strategic reason for rebuilding Japan being so close to China, man.
Well, strategically, but at the time, China has been a wild card, right? And I think MacArthur had a vision of a future of Japan, and the same reason we rebuilt Germany. Well, because we were there, right? You're there, and you can say, well, did we rebuild it as a bulwark against communism? Yeah. But there's a lot more to it than that too. Do you rebuild it as because to contrast, the Russians were rebuilt Eastern Europe as a bulwark against the West, but they, you look at their imperialistic version of it, and it was, this crappy police state and everything is kind of crappy, right?
Yeah.
Whereas our bulwark brought prosperity and freedom, and a lot more opportunity to the people. So our approach to that I would argue it was much better for the inhabitants. And much better for the broader world economy, right? You open the door to opportunity for them to, education and make a better place. And once you feed the fire, you don't have to prop them up; they prop themselves up. That's the beauty of it. Whereas the Russians were there to the bitter end, propping up their satellite states, where they just, everything was half measured, cheap, crappy, polluted. It was just enough to hold the West at bay. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't win friends and influence people. You left a whole swath of Eastern Europe that hates your guts.
Ben, we got 15 minutes left. I want to talk about you, Ben, the designer, the game designer. I'm sure a lot of people want to know what's going on with Ben Hull. Some guy asked me, what's Ben's favorite position in an FAV? Hull down or something?
Yeah. Let's see. I was in an armor crew. I did. I served in LAVs. That picture right there. When I left 2nd Light Armored Infantry Battalion. So I know a little bit about armored warfare. Hull down's pretty good when you got a 25mm cannon. Most of my combat, I was what we call a company XO. I was the second in command of a scout company. And in the way we do light armor, that runs the command post that does all the fires. So I controlled artillery, mortar, and airstrikes. And so I did forward observer and worked as a joint tactical air controller, or JTAC, as they say nowadays. And so we blew stuff up. I look at great interest with how they're doing business in Ukraine right now, and it is very illustrative on some things. It was very eye-opening on some others. I think one of the weird things is the Russians don't throw anything away, nor do they standardize. So you see every variant of everything they've ever made in the same area, and you're like, why do you do that? That's got to be a nightmare of logistics. So you see T-72Bs, T-80s, T-90s, there's different components. It's not even the same engine on all those things, right? So it's like, oh my God, you got all these different engines. When I was in Afghanistan, we had, I was running the MRAP program, the mine resistant ambush protected vehicle. And you saw that big truck in the ad, thing. That was one of them. There were several different kinds, but you know what? They all had the exact same engine.
Well, if it broke.
Yeah. And I was like, same engine, there's an ECM, engine control module, you flash memory in that, and that sets the, what are Ben's favorite of his own designs? Well, so I do design games that I play, right? Some designers design games to design games. And that's fine. It's not a criticism at all. I do like to play my games, and I like, So I do a lot of Fields of Fire. It's fun to design new stuff. I got several modules I'm working on. Of the ones I played the most, probably Musket and Pike, just because it's been around the longest. Played that a bajillion times. My favorite battle is probably Allerheim.
Are we looking at any more new Fields of Fire, but more modern?
So what I do, so one of the things we're doing with Fields of Fire is there's a team at GMT, Jason Carr and some folks, Alan Parsons and
of the Alan Parsons project.
I think if I'm not getting the name right, it's Colin Parsons, Alan.
Oh,
okay.
Well, that's disappointing.
It's Colin Parsons and Alan. And I apologize to folks. I'm terrible because it's all emails and I see email addresses. But so several guys work on
Parsons project.
Yeah. So one of the things is I stay away from anything for the last 25 years because I have an NDA. I work with the government, and I don't want to get anywhere near anything where I had anything to do with, because then I have to go through.
You can't skirt around it. You can't skirt around it anyhow.
Well, no, you can submit it to the government for review. that there's nothing classified. It's just a lot of extra work to submit that for government review. Because like Volko Runke, he did stuff that, and he's with the government. And so he went through the process and got it cleared. So it's possible to do that. It's just a pain in the butt.
Yeah.
So I try to avoid that. But I'm more than happy to work with other guys. So I know they're working on some British paratroopers. I think Colin's doing that because he's British and was a former soldier. So we're getting some newer, more modern perspectives. I try to give my advice on that. There's so he's working on some Australian stuff as well. I know I'm working on some more World War II stuff. Does I have a favorite designer who liked to work on a project with? Oh, that's a good one. Well, so I am working on a project with David Fox, but we just happen to be really good friends. So we're doing the Banish All Their Fears, the bayonet and musket that's moving kind of the musket and pike into the next era up, which is very different style of warfare. That was kind of a fun design. We were demoing that at GMT East. So that's the first volume is Blenheim and Neerwinden. Blenheim 1704, Neerwinden 1693. I'm kind of contrasting the Duke of Luxembourg and the Duke of Marlborough, the two great, French general and a British general. So it's not just Marlborough. There was the French did have some talent, and so everybody loves to hate on the French around here, which is a little unfair. They were kind of like the bee's knees for 200 years, and then they weren't. It's like, wow, how soon people forget. Oh, wait, all our military terminology is French.
That's true.
Yes.
Except for the nautical stuff. The nautical stuff is mostly
the nautical stuff. Yeah, well, of course, Americans kind of redefined nautical, because we, Nathaniel Bowditch and our plucky young frigates really kind of changed naval warfare. So as a country with two oceans, it behooved us to kind of get into that ocean thing. And so we did, and we proved ourselves pretty well. So, so one of my progenitors was Isaac Hull, captain of the USS Constitution, defeated the Guerriere. And so unfortunately, he was related to the other Hull who lost Detroit ignominiously. So you win a few, you lose a few. Yeah. But there is a Hull Street, every Navy base in the U.S. So it is nice to say, hey, I want my street back. Get off my street there, you. So Francophile Patton, who could only wish to be patted on the head by Napoleon. So what I always wonder is, for the Napoleon guys, the thing to think of is like Napoleon was kind of like the Hitler of his day. And so is anybody ever going to be okay? Because right now people are like, okay with the French going, Napoleon, he was so great.
Well, what the hell is that all about?
And like, I'm not so cool with that. I think he was kind of off his rocker. 100 years from now, are people going to be Germans going, oh, Hitler, we had it so good back then. And you're like, no, back up.
So what the hell is that all about?
Well, it's like
we don't talk as much about Napoleon's bad shit, okay? Like the Haiti situation, for example.
Oh, yeah.
That was bad news. What Napoleon did to Haiti.
Well, let's invade all these other countries.
It's very easy. We see this here in the U.S. with the Civil War becomes this story about military glory and all that, and it's very easy to do that with Napoleon too. It's an easy period to romanticize.
Yeah, they wore some cool outfits.
Oh, the outfits are fantastic.
And you're like, you fight in that.
Look at them hats. Those are some damn fine hats.
Look, the SS wore cool clothing too, man.
Little creepier though, I gotta say.
Yeah, but no, you make a good point, because that's the same kind of thing we have, with the old, romanticization of the South. I'm being a Southern boy and raised down South, and we all go, hey, can you divorce the military prowess and glory from the cause? I'm like, well, at some point you have to. I mean, if you're going to study military history, you kind of have to say, well, these are the military facts. Was it glorious? What is it? At some point you have to kind of grow up and say, well, if you're not up on current events, war is not super glorious. It can be super terrible. How many dead people in the streets of Bucha do you need to see to understand that this is not good? If it is forced upon you, we have cultural norms about, achieving glory in battle, but the overall cost is, be very careful what you get yourself into, because it's not good. And in modern warfare, sadly enough, some of the most evil things we see in modern warfare were invented by people who are like, we want to make war so terrible that you won't do it. And you're like, be careful what you ask for, because we have a high tolerance for terrible. Like the guy, Hiram Maxim, when he invented the machine gun, he goes, I'm going to make a weapon so terrible that nobody would be dumb enough to attack into it.
A-10 Warthog.
Let's it's the World War I French strategy. We will charge until they run out of bullets. It's like, well, those people are hard to make, right? That family invested 19 years of love and care into that child, and then you're going to throw them away? I mean, come on, Lord, how terrible is that? The cost. I
think Sherman said that.
Yeah, Sherman did say that.
It was the old saying, Sherman said war is hell, and he made sure that it was. So, I mean, I think one of the paradigm shifts that we see in the modern era is because of the proliferation of news and camera and photos, is the idea to communicate how really awful it is, and how incredibly destructive modern warfare is. And we saw just the inkling. You start seeing some of those with the photos of the battlefields in the Civil War. And then you see, bodies bloated on the ground, and people are like, oh God. And like, yeah. And we're going to show you more and more and more. And then we get into the modern age where you can TikTok and you see horror on your Twitter feed.
Or that was something that people really started to see in Vietnam. To Americans, you started to see in Vietnam, or these horrifying images that would show up on the front page of the newspaper or in Life magazine or whatever. That'll change your outlook.
Hey, Ben, you want to invade a country? It's called Ukraine, and you got barometric bombs. Why aren't you using them? I would.
The Russians don't have. I'll let me answer, and then I'll let Ben answer intelligently from a position of somebody that knows what he's talking about. I don't think the Russians can afford to or are prepared to escalate indefinitely.
That's a fair statement. So I think first off, the Russian ground forces are not all, when they say Russia had a 1 million-man army, I'm like, no, that's the 1 million-man military. That includes the Navy and the VKS, which is their aerospace service, which we would call the Air Force and the Space Force. They have all their rocket forces. So their actual ground forces is not that big. It's large, don't get me wrong, but it's not, it's not 10-1 on the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians have a smaller army, but a much larger proportion of their army is ground forces, because they didn't have a big air force. They didn't have a big Navy. So of their military, a bunch of it is on the ground. Plus they've mobilized their territorial defense and all their reserves. They probably have more armed men on the ground than the Russians. And maybe by a significant factor. Now, do the Russians have more materiel? Yeah, but they're not super effective at utilizing it. I think the Russians have moved to this battalion tactical group thing. They did this a few years back as part of their reforms. I think it is terrible idea. It's their thought this is my opinion. I've only been doing this military thing since 1988, and I'm telling you, this BTG is stupid idea. and it's not proving itself to be particularly effective in combat. It has a lot of problems with it. And the one biggest problem I'd say is the dissolution of fires. To break away from a brigade, being able to mass fires at a brigade or division level is very powerful, and they break that up by doing the battalion tactical groups. Now they'll probably reinventing it because they need mass fires, but you lose some momentum in doing that. So I think the biggest problem the Ukrainians have is they don't have larger intermediate formations above the brigade level. So mounting major offensive operations is difficult, except in a kind of a distributed warfare environment, which makes for a fairly successful ability to do kind of broad, limited offensives or counterattacks. Doing major offensive operations, it's not really configured for that because they don't have core. What we would call an army corps in the Russian terms is, and this is weird because the Russians kind of got rid of this. They kept all these separate brigades, but in the Russian army previously, there was a echelon called an army corps. And an army corps in Russian terms was a collection of 4 independent brigades. And that was a powerful maneuver force that was meant to be the centerpiece of an operational maneuver group. So the divisions would fight on the linear warfare and make a hole, and then a corps would pass through the division. And that was based on the World War II pattern. And so the current Russian ground forces have a mix of divisions and brigades, but they've eliminated that corps headquarters, and everybody's subordinate to the army headquarters. The army headquarters in Russian terms is the same as a corps headquarters in American terms. That would be a 3-star general or a lieutenant general commanding an army. But it typically will have 1 division and several brigades in one of these combined arms armies. And they might attach a VDV unit, which is the air mobile air assault forces, which are, interestingly enough, a separate service. So they're not really considered the standard ground forces. It's kind of like, the Marine Corps is a separate service. The VDV is a separate service within the Russian army, which is all their parachute and air assault folks. And so they were attached to these combined arms units as needed.
I mean, what I'm seeing is from the Russians that they're showing us how incompetent they are.
It's
not a good thing, which is a bad thing.
Well, yeah. So you've got to be competent at scale. So one of the things I told folks is, like, when we fought the Iraqis, they were competent at certain echelons, but not at all echelons. So when I talk echelons, I might have like at the division, brigade, battalion, company, squad level. You have to be good at all of them. You don't have to be great at all of them, but you have to be generally competent across the echelon to be successful. So like when we fought the Iraqis, they actually were competent at the division and brigade and battalion maneuver. They could maneuver forces, position them on the battlefield. Then that's hard to do. Do not underplay how complicated it is to maneuver 150,000 troops and operate and occupy space. So their positions were sited well. They dug appropriate fortifications, all of the right frontage. They weren't badly led, but at the lower levels, they couldn't hit what they shot at. So at the company and below, when we got into a gunfight, we outshot them every time. Wow, so literally, I just walk out and say, boom, 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 boom. All right, we won the gunfight. Next gunfight. Boom, 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 boom. And they couldn't hit. They couldn't adjust fire from their artillery fast enough. We could adjust fire faster. And so I could put effective fire on them before they could put effective fire on me. And because it was a race, we'd make contact, and then, I'm on the horn. Their mortars and artillery are hitting, mine are hitting, and I'm getting mine on top of their heads.
Right.
It's on mine. And so we just outshot them again and again and again. And then you just steamroller. So it doesn't, you still had to be effective. Your guys still have to shoot what they, be able to hit what they shoot at, so you can do everything right, but if you can't do that right, you're still going to lose. So, the Russians show some competence at various levels, but there's holes in one of the holes. But I've seen enough videos to see, some of their troops are handled at a level that I would see kind of commensurate with, conscripts. One of the things they went to in their conscript army, they went down to a 12-month conscription because they were having a hard time getting enough conscripts. It was a 2-year deal. And a couple of years back, they rolled it to 1 year. Well, 1 year is just not enough. You just can't train people to be very effective. Their volunteer forces are on a 3-year contract, which is still not good enough. Our guys, it's a 4-year enlistment. So if you just do the math, you can say, Western, a U.S. unit is going to have a percentage of guys who are on that
for 4 years,
3rd and 4th year of goodness. So guess what? Those guys they're the gunners on your tanks. They're the gunners on your mortars.
Yeah.
They're your team leads. Those are those corporals, lance corporals and junior sergeants that are very effective at their job and just outshoot the other guys. And so, if you don't put it all together, like I said, I've got plenty of videos of them maneuvering and doing things that are not inherently stupid, but it's just a combination of things that then runs afoul. I think the effectiveness of our anti-tank missiles is great. That's a tough problem to solve in that terrain and against in mass armored formations. How do you? Well, it's pretty infantry intensive. And their army is not infantry intensive. A Russian rifle company, a motorized rifle company, is small. Its full strength on paper is 90 dudes, and a lot of those units are at 80% or less strength.
Ben, we've come up to the end of the world on our program. I can listen to you, I swear to God, for days and days and days and days, because unbelievable. Thank you so much for being here, man. I hope we can do this again.
Oh yeah, just let me know. Happy to help.
I will. Artie, what's going on in your channel?
I got the new counter trays. GMT's bringing counter trays back, but God only knows how long it's going to take. So I got a video review of the new counter tray product from Aegis Storage.
I just got an email from them.
Oh yeah, they'll send you some counter trays. They're nice.
Are they?
Yeah, they're nice. I got my Ericord in it. They're nice.
They look DVG-ish.
But they don't suck.
Right.
So unlike the DVG trays, they not the bad mouth DVG. They do some fine product, but their counter trays are balls on toast. So
thanks, John.
Not endorsed.
I do.
Okay, hey, Ben, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot.
Stick around. I'm going to say goodbye behind the lines or whatever you want to call it. And Artie, yeah. So thank you, people, for watching this. I thought it was incredible. Yeah. Goodbye.
Good night.